you? Where are you located right this minute?
It's good to be with you, Julie. We're actually at Wahls headquarters here in Coralville. And speaking of dogs, my dog Zelda, who some of you may get periodic fundraising emails or text messages from, is actually at my feet because my wife is working from Muscatine today, and I'm at the office. So Zelda's keeping us company here at in Coralville.
Oh, well, great, great. Tell us about your family. You're recently married, I guess, in the last couple of years, correct?
Yeah, just celebrated our fourth wedding anniversary. We were supposed to get married in September of 2020, but the COVID pandemic put the kibosh on that and pushed that back a year. Some of the folks on the call may know our wedding officiant from that wedding. Now, the Reverend Senator Tom Harkin, who we were fortunate enough to have lead the ceremony. We have, obviously, I mentioned Zelda, our mini golden doodle, and our son Elijah, who will be turning 2 in March of next year. I've got some cute photos. He's starting to,
Aw.
get that language explosion going, and it feels like every day he's got a new word or collection of sounds. And folks may also be familiar. My parents, my mom Terry, my mom Jackie, are also I think decently well known. My mom Terry's done a lot of work around functional medicine and her experience with multiple sclerosis, which she was diagnosed with when I was 8 years old. And my mom Jackie is a nurse practitioner at the VA hospital, the outpatient clinic here in Coralville. And as a federal employee, she's definitely had a tough year with everything that's been going on in Washington, D.C. And so we've certainly had a kind of a firsthand experience with what that's all been like.
I'm glad you brought your mom up with multiple sclerosis. It sounds like she had not exactly a remission, but a correction due to dietary changes. Do you mind getting off topic a little bit and explaining?
No, totally fine. So my mom was diagnosed when I was 8 years old. She um, was, when she was, my age now, she was very active. She was, ran marathons, cross country skied a lot. Had a lot of dreams, as a parent of taking my sister and me on a lot of adventures. MS, for folks who aren't familiar, has generally kind of two types. You have progressive MS, which is a pretty direct descent into the kind of physical immobility, and relapse remitting MS, which is more episodic. She was diagnosed with progressive MS, and so she had a pretty grim future. But Terry, kind of values that she was raised with and the values she raised me with, very strong, determined woman, refused to take no for an answer. Some of my earliest, some of my memories from junior high school, getting up at 5 o'clock to go to practice for football or swimming, whatever. And my mom would be up doing her own exercises, trying to stay healthy. She made some pretty dramatic changes to her diet and lifestyle, making mostly around kind of a lot more fruits and vegetables in her diet, cutting out some of those more inflammatory foods. And it had a pretty tremendous impact on her. It didn't happen overnight, took time. And now, she just turned 70 years old last month. So she's got other, normal parts of aging that she's dealing with. But it's been a pretty remarkable turnaround for her. And she certainly, both my mom, Terry, and my mom, Jackie, very much love being grandparents. And I will tell you, Julie, this campaign would not be possible without the tremendous amount of childcare that my wife and I are getting from my parents and from my sister, Zeb, who also is a big hit with Elijah.
But let's talk some about you and how you have evolved. You were an engineering student at the university. What did you think you were going to do as an engineer? Did that play a big role or a small role?
Yeah, great question. So, I grew up in Iowa City, went to Iowa City West High, graduated in 2009, went to the University of Iowa studying civil and environmental engineering. So you're talking about infrastructure projects, roads, bridges. Obviously renewable energy is a huge part, and at the time even was then, today even more so, huge part of our state's electricity generation. And so that was what I like to do. I loved Legos when I was a kid growing up, and that was how I thought I was going to spend my time. And then when I was a sophomore at the University of Iowa, my parents had gotten married in 2009 after the Varnum decision. In early 2011, state legislative Republicans were trying to overturn that Supreme Court ruling by amending our state constitution. I gave a short speech to the legislature about my family and what the Varnum decision had meant for us. A intern with the Iowa House Democrats recorded that video or that testimony on a flip cam. I don't know if folks remember flip cams, little camcorders before we all had, smartphones in our pockets. But video of that obviously got uploaded to YouTube, went, super viral on Facebook and blogs and everything at that time before Substack. And when that happened, I kind of had this choice to make, right? Of like, do I go back to my life as an engineering student and kind of not go down this more advocacy path, or do I step up to the plate and go be that advocate that, when I was a kid, I often felt like I couldn't see. One of my earliest memories when I was in junior high school for a social studies class was I had to watch the 2004 Republican National Convention and, listen to these politicians get up and talk about the war on terror and the war in Iraq and all of this in one breath. And then in the next breath, warn about the threat of same-sex marriage. And even as an eighth grader, I understood, oh, they're talking about families like mine. And I remember how scary that felt. And so in that moment in 2011, I just understood that eighth grade Zach would have been very disappointed in college sophomore Zach if I hadn't gone out and be that advocate that I wanted to see. That work took me all over the state of Iowa and then ultimately all over the country. And it's interesting, Julie. I learned a lot, obviously, from that experience. And I was often one of the folks who got sent in to some of the more skeptical or even hostile audiences, trying to win people over. And what I learned from that experience was that when you show up with some grace and some humility, you're willing to meet people where they are. You take their concerns seriously. You're willing to answer their questions, however, seemingly rude or misplaced or sometimes wildly inappropriate those questions may be. People, I think, will often be willing to give you a little bit more, respect back than some folks might expect. And so I learned a lot from that experience as an advocate for marriage equality. Wound up co-founding and leading a national organization. I'm an Eagle Scout to help the Boy Scouts of America and their decades-old ban on gay members. We won those campaigns. I went to graduate school at Princeton University's Woodrow Wilson School to get my master's in public policy. And then while I was there, found out that my longtime state senator, Bob Dvorsky, was going to be retiring. I moved home a little early to finish my degree remotely and run for his seat. And, again, competitive Democratic primary. Wound up winning that primary, and it was kind of funny. The primary election day and my graduation day were on the same day in June of 2018. And so the joke that I told 100 times on the stump was, I won't be able to walk, but I am able to run. And we wound up winning that race in 2018. Then had a general election that year. And not everybody knows this about me, but my district was not just Johnson County, where I live, to your point. I also represented all of Cedar County to the east and a little bit of Muscatine County south and east. And the thing that's interesting about Cedar and Muscatine County is that they are both pivot counties. So these are counties that Barack Obama carried twice in 2008 and 2012 that then flipped to Donald Trump. And Republicans at that time were basically thinking about nominating somebody to run against me through a special nominating convention because no one ran in the primary. They ultimately decided not to do that, which I thought was flattering. But I wound up running against a libertarian named Carl Cranbreck. And it was interesting, actually. If you look at the election results from that election in 2018, you look at Cedar County in particular, because I have a whole county, and you kind of take Carl out of the picture because, again, he was a libertarian candidate. But you just look at who, went down the ballot and voted for me. I was actually able to win more votes in that 2018 campaign than a lot of other Democrats who were running that cycle. So Fred Hubble, Dave Loebsack, Rob Sand, actually all wound up getting fewer votes than I did. And when we sat down and crunched the numbers afterward, it looked like there were about 1,000 voters who had voted for Donald Trump in 2016 when he ran, who voted for me in 2018. And as you can imagine, that was an interesting thing for me to experience my very first race.
So you answered the question about electability out of Johnson County right out of the chute. I want to.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, no, good for you. I want to go back to that moment when you were giving that speech at age 19, I think,
19. Yep, you got it.
in the legislature. How did that come about? Did somebody invite you to do that? Did it take you a while to think about, ooh, do I really want to do that? Were you worried about peers and what they thought, or what was going on with you then?
It's a funny story, Julie. So I got connected to the organization that had helped argue the Varnum decision in 2009. They're called Lambda Legal. They do litigation work all over the country because they were doing some partnership work with organizations that worked with kids who have, same-sex parents. And so I had been like an adult, volunteer essentially with them in some of the programming that they had done in the state. And so when this hearing was organized or called, I think, by the Iowa House Democrats, the word kind of went out of like, who do we know who could show up and speak? And it's funny, I actually had plans that night. I was supposed to be babysitting for a couple that I was friends with here in town. And so my first response was, can I like submit my testimony in writing, or like, do I need to be there in person? They're like, no, you really need to be there in person. And I said, well, look, I'll see if I can find another babysitter. But thankfully, I was able to find another babysitter and made it over to Des Moines. It was a snowy, wintry night. We were just talking before we hopped on about driving back from Des Moines the other evening during a winter weather event, and that was certainly the case that snowy night in January of 2011 as well. But suffice to say, very glad that we did find that other babysitter. The speech obviously totally changed my life. It's actually how I met my wife, Chloe. She was writing for a feminist blog in New York called Feministing. And she happened to be on blog duty the week that the video went viral. And so she wrote up the video, and the headline that she put on it was "Marry Me, Zach Wahls."
You kidding
Uh,
me?
when 100% true. It's all a matter of public record. So our first conversation was actually an interview that I did because I sent her an email and said, obviously, I won't marry you, but I'd be happy to do an interview. So we did an interview, started dating a few years later, and now we've got a 2-year-old.
I love it. That's a great story.
I think she does sometimes wish that she had written, marry me, Hugh Jackman, but that's
Hey,
all right.
you'll do in a pinch. So, what were you surprised by the reaction? I mean, everybody knew about that speech. It was electrifying. You had such poise and s- oh, your it's been a while since I watched it, but your spirit of conviction and authenticity was really striking for for a kid. You were a kid.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I was a teenager. I had never done anything like that before, kind of speaking to, legislators, like my family was not a part of the litigation in 2009. So I was totally blown away by the response and the reaction. And, I really had no idea what I was getting myself into, to be totally candid. And look, it was an unusual thing to have happen, as a 19-year-old. It really completely transformed my life. It's not, um, look, I mean, I guess I was going to say it's not often that you get a moment like that, but I actually think it's probably a more common experience than a lot of us realize. It's like a very clear fork in the road moment in your life where there's kind of a clear before and after. You do always worry, like, you don't ever want to peak when you're at the age of 19. But thankfully, I think we've been able to do a lot of good things with that opportunity and to pay forward the incredible opportunity that I got as a result of all of that.
Is that when you decided that politics was a path you wanted to take, or did that happen?
Yeah, not immediately. I mean, honestly, Julie, it's funny. I'll go back, wind the clock back. So I gave that speech on a Monday night. That was January 31st. Um, the 1st of February, it was like it got uploaded. The video was starting to go viral, but like I was only hearing about it really from like my own friends in the state. And then on February 2nd was when it really like overnight, exploded. And so I guess, the thing to me was that the initial reaction to me was just, like I was totally overwhelmed. And then ultimately, I thankfully was able to get a lot of support from people in my life who were able to help me navigate that because, both of my parents work in medicine. Going viral means something totally different in their world. Neither of them, worked in politics or PR or anything. And so I really needed a lot of help. But I think the response to this speech was a reminder that politics affects all of us. And when people find ordinary people, and I was an ordinary 19-year-old, find the courage to stand up and speak truth to power, people resonate with that and it connects with them. And I heard just so many stories, then and over the years from people for whom that speech helped them find the courage to come out to their families or to reconsider their position or to rebuild a relationship with a child who they had ostracized. And, you know, yeah, it's something that reminds us all that we've got the power to do things if we can find the courage to do it.
Zach, what was just going through your mind right then? There was something that caught you.
Um, it's funny. Like I said a second ago, just how transformative that whole experience has been. Um, um, somebody we were in Decorah a few weeks ago, and our host for that event did not tell me this ahead of time, but she played the full 3-minute video right before the event started, and I hadn't actually listened to the whole speech in a while, and you know, I was thinking about my son, Eli, and just how he like literally wouldn't be here without all of that. My wife and I never would have met. And so I was thinking just about the impact it's had on other people and the impact it's had on my own family.
Okay. So if I'm Ashley Hinson and I've watched the first 15 minutes of the conversation, I'm going, oh, good. He's defining himself with LGBTQ issues and being a elected official from Johnson County, Iowa City. And I'm thinking, well, I sure hope this guy wins the primary. What do you say to this fictionalized version of Ashley Hinson?
Well, look, I mean, that's certainly not how I define myself. Certainly happy to answer any other questions about that speech, and it's certainly how I think a lot of people met me for the first time. But the good news is I've got quite a bit of other track record that we are talking about when we're out on the campaign trail, because frankly, the campaign's not about me. And that was actually, I mean, Julie, to make the point, one of the most important things that I learned about politics from that experience, both the work I did around marriage equality and then when I ran for office for the first time in 2018. People have their own challenges in their own lives. They want to know what you as a candidate or you as an elected official are going to do to make their lives better. They want to know, do you share their values? Do you understand the challenges, the issues that are facing their community? And that was something that I put a lot of time and energy in my first campaign in 2018. And then again, over my 4 years representing, a dozen different communities in small town rural Iowa. And when we started this campaign back in June, we spent those first 2 months really trying to listen to people all over the state. We held events in all four corners, big cities, small towns, rural communities, houses on dirt roads. And the things that came up during that part of the campaign that we now talk about everywhere we go. I mean, number one right now, Julie, it is the economy. It's this challenge of a cost of living crisis that is squeezing Iowans, whether you're a working class family, middle class family, retired, fixed income. We feel the squeeze, whether it's the grocery store, the doctor's office, the pharmacy, the nursing home. When we started this campaign, Julie, I was telling folks how the cost of the child care that Chloe and I have for our son Eli costs almost as much as our mortgage. Today, it costs more than our mortgage because a month ago, our child care center shut down with 2 weeks' notice. And the only center that we could find that had availability to start immediately was one that cost more than what the previous one had and is now costing more than our mortgage. And so this is the number one thing that I hear from people. And that is the thing that we talk about first and foremost everywhere we go, because that is what people are facing right now. You talk about the impacts of the tariffs, they're jacking up costs. And that's something, by the way, that Ashley Hinson has voted for 3 different times this year. You look at all the things that she's voted for in terms of cutting investments in Medicaid, cutting food assistance, cutting investments in clean energy that were, as a result of that vote, by ending those investments in clean energy, Iowa electricity bills are going to be going up by hundreds of dollars a year over the next decade. And so I think that when it comes to the number one issue that Iowans tell us they care about, I would put my record up against Ashley Hinson 7 days a week. And we can get into this here in a little bit, but I've got my own experience with Ashley Hinson that I'm certainly happy to talk about from when we were at the State House together.
Okay, well, let's save that for just a minute. One question I want to ask you now, as your generation is coming up, and by the way, I think you are the youngest in the primary field running.
Julie, I was the youngest member of the Iowa State Senate when I was elected at the age of 27 in 2018. 7 years later, I am still the youngest member of the Iowa State Senate at 34.
Well, good for you. You've got some runway. Tell me, if you would, what it is like to be in your generation where you grew up getting sh shooter drills. What your generation is coming into the leadership roles of government now. What is that like, and is it something those of us who didn't have that experience need to understand from your point of view?
I mean, look, Julie, if I had to put a single word on it, I'd say it's frustrating. I mean, it's frustrating as hell. You look at what has happened to people in the millennial generation born between, roughly 1980, 1995. To me, that threshold basically is like, do you remember 9/11, which to me happened when I was in the fifth grade? You look at basically our entire lives, from when we're in elementary, junior high, high school, college, you're talking about, war in Iraq, you're talking about the global financial crisis, you're talking about, depressed job market, massive technological change, COVID pandemic, and now obviously the rise of so many challenges that we're facing on the horizon, whether that's this new kind of multipolar world at a geopolitical level. You're talking about artificial intelligence, how that is going to play out in the future. And one of the reasons why we decided to launch this campaign, Julie, is like we need a new generation of leaders. I think you look at the politicians in Washington, D.C., they are not addressing our concerns. Our problems are getting worse, not better. I talk to so many people in my generation who are my age, early 30s, 20s, who want to start a family and they literally can't afford to. And this is not a partisan concern. I was just a few weeks ago, a few months ago, I should say, I was in Des Moines and had the opportunity to catch up with an old friend of mine from high school, a year or two older than me, conservative Republican. And Jeff said, Zach, I get all your emails and texts and everything. And I don't agree with everything you say, but I do really like your willingness to call out the corruption in DC, which we can get to in a second because that is a big part of this campaign as well. And then Jeff shared that he and his wife want to start a family and they literally can't afford to because they can't find a childcare provider that they can afford on their current budget. And at the same time, neither of them wants to stop working to stay home full time because they both love their jobs and want to continue to build their careers. And so when we talk about how that is affecting people in my generation, I know it looks a little different for people in your generation and others. But that's the number one thing that I'm hearing from people. And again, that's not just a Democrat or Republican thing. For retirees, we were in Waterloo last weekend for a meet and greet, heard from a woman on Social Security who's, after you factor the increasing costs for Medicare, her take home benefit from Social Security went up $21 last year. I mean, just think about that for a second, right? I mean, her grocery bill, went up per week more than $21 a year, right? Per week, over the course of compared to over the course of a year. And so to me, that is a huge issue that we're facing. I've been very pleased. We are on the record supporting eliminating the cap on the Social Security income tax, which is a key piece of shoring up the trust fund. We need to make sure that that program, is funded for seniors and that it exists for my generation and future generations, because so many people who are my age don't think that protection is going to be there in the future. And we have to make sure that we protect it.
Okay, so I'm going to let the folks who are on the call know that we'll be shifting to you all shortly, and I'll start with members of the Iowa Writers Collaborative first. I also see Alex Wilkin is on the call, but he's driving. Alex, when you're at a point when you pull over, if you're so inclined to join the conversation about the nurses' strike, love to get you involved in this as well. Who of the collaborative would like to go first? I've got Laura Bellin. You ready?
Sure, I can go first. I have to just say, first of all, a lot of people don't know that I'm also a parenting support group volunteer leader. It's one of the hats I wear. And I think 2-year-olds get such a bad rap. I think 2-year-olds are just a laugh a minute. And the average 2-year-old is learning 3 to 10 new words every single day. So
Yeah.
I like to say that 2-year-olds, it's like being two is like cramming for a college exam every day of your life. So
Yeah, no, Eli's definitely at that point, Laura. I will say he's definitely in a little bit of his whiny phase at the moment. He's got molars coming in, so it's been a tough week, but
it's
it's a great
okay.
age. It's a great age.
It's all good. We all like to whine every once in a while. Anyway, a quick A quick question and then like a more substantial question. Scouts for Equality, is that organization like disbanded, like mission accomplished,
Mhm.
done, or does somebody else run that now?
Great question. We dissolved the organization, I believe, December 2020. I have to double check the exact date. Um, but yeah, it was a while ago. We were able to win some really big wins. There's still plenty of work to do, obviously, in terms of making the scouts, supporting them and trying to be more inclusive. But the organization formally wound down a while ago.
Okay. My question is, you've been really critical of the Democratic establishment and particularly the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, which is perceived to be supporting one of your primary opponents. I have in the past been very critical of the DSCC's interference in primaries. But I mean, can we just be real though? All of the candidates, I mean, you all flew out to Washington and you all met with people, senators in Washington. I mean, wouldn't you all have welcomed support from the DSCC?
Hmm. Interesting question. So, couple of thoughts. I mean, first and foremost, I've never met with Chuck Schumer, and I think that from my perspective, the way that they are looking at the race, both currently today and the way that they've looked at the state of Iowa in the past, is just completely disconnected from what is actually happening on the ground. I mean, you go back to 2022, Mike Franken gives Chuck Grassley the closest race of his career, and doesn't get a dime of support, right, from folks in DC. I would tell you a couple of things. So when I don't want to get into details of who I met with, but what I will say is I was very clear when I was having some of those conversations that people on the ground here in Iowa need to be trusted to run a campaign that is actually going to allow us to win races here in the state, that reflects what we are hearing from people as we travel across Iowa. Because we have seen what has happened when some of these national groups have come in and try to run the show. It doesn't work very well, right? I think that the frustration that I felt, that we've all felt, is that things in Iowa are not going well, and we need a new direction, right? And anyone who's familiar with my background, I'm certainly happy to get into it more, knows that I have not hesitated to push for a different direction for our party. And so in those conversations, I was very clear that that was the approach that we were going to bring to this campaign. And that is exactly what we've done since we launched back in June. And so from my perspective, I think it is really important that we have a nominee in this race that voters trust does not work for Chuck Schumer or for Donald Trump, for that matter, like Ashley Hinson does, who's just a rubber stamp for an agenda that's been devastating for Iowa. We need a senator who is going to put Iowa's interests first, who actually understands the challenges that are facing people in all 99 counties, who is willing to listen to people on the ground, which I think is one of the most important things that I have learned representing small town of rural Iowa, because it's not enough just to show up. You also have to actually go represent those people in your work. And that is what our campaign has been all about. That is where the three core issues that we talk about where we go came from: affordability, corruption in Washington, D.C., and that new vision for a small town in rural Iowa. And that's what's resonating with people. And so, look, we'll obviously get through the primary next June. I'm very confident that we're building a campaign that's going to win the primary. And I'll tell you, and I know Julie kind of put that little hypothetical to us earlier, I'm very optimistic about our chances against Ashley Hinson. There was some incredible polling just last week showing that Iowa, we now have Donald Trump's approval rating underwater. There are only two states in the country that he carried by double digits, where he is now underwater in his approval rating. And those two states are Iowa and Ohio. And in all likelihood, those are seats 50 and 51 and a Democratic majority for the U.S. Senate in 2027.
Julie, can I just super quick follow-up question? There was some reporting that Senator Chris Van Hollen was talking with some Democratic candidates for Senate who are not necessarily backed by the DSCC. Have you had any recent conversations with Chris Van Hollen?
I did have a good meeting with Senator Van Hollen recently. Got to visit with him when he was in Des Moines for the steak fry. And I think that he's someone who has a really bright future in our party.
I thought Laura's follow-up question was going to be about voter registration because she's rather bleak about the Democratic Party's prospects due to the topsy-turvy nature of registration of Democrats. What do you have to say to that?
Yeah, look, I mean, I certainly understand the concern, and we've got to take voter registration seriously. But my view at a high level is that, this campaign is not just about voter registration numbers, right? You look at Chuck Schumer, right? That's somebody who said that we could write off blue collar and rural voters, and that we would just make up for that by picking up suburban voters. And that was just fundamentally wrong. But ultimately, we're the ones here in Iowa who are paying the price for his, political miscalculation. So we can't take, winning these voters back for granted just because they're being hit by tariffs or Medicaid cuts or anything like that. We have to be proactive in going out to rebuild our support in these communities by taking a winning message to them that speaks directly to their biggest concerns and that presents them, with a positive vision for the future of our state. Because I think that what is happening in DC right now, what's happening in the economy, gives us an opportunity to reverse a lot of what, Laura has identified in her writing, but it's not going to happen on its own, right? You have to do the work of rebuilding trust with these voters, showing up in their communities, understanding their issues, and putting together that positive vision for the future. That's exactly what I've done in the legislature. It's exactly what we're doing in this campaign, and that's why I know that we have what it takes to go all the way. The
Okay.
last point I would just make just super briefly, Julie, is that voter registration is a lagging indicator. People change their behavior in the voting booth before they change their voter registration. I'm sure, like a lot of folks on this Zoom, I knocked on plenty of doors in 2016 and in 2018 of registered Democrats who definitely voted for Donald Trump in that election cycle in 2016. We were able to win some of them back in my state Senate campaign in 2018 when I was running, but it doesn't happen on its own. But people, again, they change their behavior before they change their registration. So that certainly is something that is not written in stone anywhere.
Okay. We'll go to Chuck, then Bob Leonard, and then Doug Burns. Chuck?
Hi, Zach. Chuck Offenberger here. I'm one of those Democrats that hit from the time you were on the floor of the legislature speaking about your own family as you were growing up. I've had an eye out for you and looked forward to the time when you would be doing exactly what you're doing now, or for some office. I didn't necessarily know what that was. And I was furious, whatever year it was it 23 when you were you'd been elected minority leader of the Iowa Senate, and then you got, call it whatever we want, but you got torpedoed in your leadership, as I would characterize it, and then over you can tell us what it was over, but how did you feel coming out of that in terms of, I thought it was disastrous for a very fragile Democratic Party at that point to go after somebody that had a real future in the party. You've done a good job recovering from that, but how did you feel about that? And is that rift you had with certain members of the Senate at that point, is that healed up or is that still alive?
And if I
I
may
will,
add to that, what did you learn about leadership from that experience?
sure. Yeah, all good questions. Yeah, look, Chuck, first of all, appreciate the warm words. I agree with you. I'm sick of losing, right? I mean, fundamentally, right? What we have been doing has not worked. And the record speaks for itself, right? And bluntly, there are, members of the establishment, both here in our own party and out in Washington, D.C., who want to pretend that things are fine, that our brand doesn't need to be completely overhauled, that we don't need a new approach of how we're engaging voters in our state and across our country. And they just want to keep trying to do the same thing over and over because you know what? There are people in our party who get paid a significant amount of money, no matter whether or not they win or lose the election, right? And those people have a disproportionate impact in the political strategies that go into these races, just like this one. It was very clear to me from that leadership role that I was in that the approach that we had been taking needed to change. We needed new people. We needed new ideas. We needed to raise the expectations for every single member of the Iowa Senate Democratic Caucus. And I'll just be very clear, Chuck. I would never ask anybody on my own caucus to do something that I was not willing to do. As the leader, you're the one who's doing probably more hours than just about anybody else other than a handful of the candidates who are running in some of those most competitive races. And I thought it was absolutely imperative that every single member of our caucus from a safe seat was working their tail off to help us win back the majority because we see the consequences when we lose. When we don't have political power, terrible things have been happening to our state, whether it's the attacks on reproductive rights, the attacks on our public education system, attacks on the workers' rights, and the fact that Iowa labor unions have gotten just completely devastated by what has happened with changes that Republicans have made to Iowa law. I mean, there are so many things. The stakes are incredibly high. And I think it's the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. And so I was not, I felt a real sense of urgency in terms of trying to bring that change in a new direction and a new approach. And there are, Julie, to your point, there are certainly plenty of things that I would do differently if I could go back and do that all again. And I never imagined that I would find myself in that role. I was a first-term senator. I was 29 years old. The caucus had come to me to ask me to run for this leadership position. And when I got there, I was just shocked at what I found. And that was why I felt that real urgency around making those changes. And fundamentally, I mean, we have the ability in this race to make the same choice, again, right? I learned about the need to challenge the status quo. That's certainly part of why I've become a strong supporter of term limits. It's why we've been willing to center corruption in this campaign when we heard that from voters. And Julie, I do want to make sure we get to the story about Ashley Hinson, because that's one of the most blatant examples of the influence of corporate and special interest money in our politics that I've ever seen. But I do think that to me was an animating. It was a huge learning. I learned a lot from that experience, is what I'm trying to say. And so in terms of leadership specifically that I learned, Julie, look, there's certainly, you have to find the right balance between bringing people along, especially when you've got to bring a group of people forward. I also think that if I had been able to been willing to push for more change sooner, we might have been able to actually capitalize when I came into the leadership election in the first place. If anything, I wish that we had pushed for some of those changes earlier on in my tenure as leader. But in this race, we have the opportunity to put some of those lessons, to practice, right? We've been able to build a great team. We've got a great campaign culture. If you go to our website, you can see a lot of the values that we've really been prioritizing in this race. And I will tell you that has given us, I think, a real clarity when it comes to taking on those corruption issues that I mentioned. I already talked about term limits. We made a day one decision. We're not going to take a dime of corporate PAC money. We're leading by example in that regard. And as a U.S. Senator, I'll be a day one co-sponsor of a constitutional amendment to overturn the Citizens United decision. I've also said that if elected to the U.S. Senate, not only will I co-sponsor legislation to ban members of Congress from owning or trading stocks while they're serving in office, I will also make sure that we're leading by example. Neither me, my immediate family, or my staff, none of us will own, trade, sell individual stocks while I'm serving in office.
Okay, thanks, Doug Burns.
Senator, good to see you. Glad I saw you, Senator, at the Progress Iowa event. So good that we both made it back.
Glad you got back safe. Yeah, exactly.
That snowy weather. Senator, I see Alex Wilkin on the call. He's a nurse at Iowa Methodist. He was on Julie's cast a couple of weeks ago, and he's at the center. He's one of the chief organizers of a collection of nurses, 2,000 nurses that just voted recently. You and I talked about this offline at the Progress Iowa event, but put this vote in context. The nurses vote. The Unity Point nurses on the 4 campuses. If it does go through, as it appears mathematically it's likely to do, but still, because of the way the challenges were, the origin of the challenges, it's still in doubt. But what would this mean? Would this be a watershed moment for unions, for healthcare in the state? Just put this in a broader context, Senator.
I mean, Doug, so this one's personal for me. So my mom, Jackie, is an SEIU member when she worked for the University of Iowa Hospital when we from 2000 to 2009. And, it was actually her union contract that made sure that when she was laid off during the Great Recession, that we as a family were able to stay afloat. We talked a little bit about my mom, Terry's challenges with MS, and that was a very fraught moment for us as a family. So I learned at an early age how big of a difference being able to collectively negotiate a contract, fight for benefits, including unemployment benefits, severance, what have you, can be when you're talking about hardworking Iowa families. And I think if you look at what's happening across our state, frankly, what's happening across our country, to go back to the generational question that Julie asked, there's a reason why millennials and Generation Z are some of the most pro-labor generations, since the New Deal. And the reason there's a lot of momentum for unions and organization across our state, that's because people have understood the consequences when you have an economy that's working great for people at the very top, but not for middle class families, working class families, who increasingly feel like we're being left behind. I was honored to win the support of Teamsters Local 90, which is working with those organizers and those nurses who are organizing as a part of this election. You know that our campaign is actually, I believe, the first candidate, Senate candidate, to organize our own staff, which we're really excited about. And when Teamsters Local 90 and the nurses they're working with win this election, is that I think they're going to your point with kind of where the ballots are at. I think it's a huge shot in the arm, and it's going to be really exciting for lots of other people who are looking at their own workplaces and realize that they have the opportunity to organize, to fight for fairer contracts. And I think especially, and we alluded to this briefly, you look at what some of those economic changes may be that are coming down the pike through some of these things with artificial intelligence and more. It is more important than ever that workers have the ability to control their futures and not just be subjected to the whims of big corporations that frankly don't really care about their employees and to see them as numbers on a spreadsheet. I'm really proud to have been endorsed by more labor locals in this race than any other candidate by a pretty wide clip. And again, that just goes back to my track record as a supporter of hardworking people as an Iowa State Senator.
Okay, let's see. Let's go to Bob Leonard and Lyle Muller.
Hi, Zach. Thanks for coming on today with Julie. One of the
Bob, is
things
this a
that
vinyl collection behind you here, or are those all books?
those are books. Those
Okay,
are children's books.
got it. Okay, so I recognize a couple of them.
Yeah, there's some well-worn titles.
There you go.
But yeah, that's it. Um, One of the things that really hit your district that I want to talk with you about, I think, is one of the greatest underreported stories in Iowa. And it was when, the Trump Musk Doge cuts hit, and it hit the University of Iowa really hard, hit the hospital really hard. I looked up that in 2024, I think if I remember correctly, the University of Iowa, I think the hospital, but I'd have to check to make sure, received $190 million for medical research. And I just thought, well, I'm just going to sit back and watch the media go at this, the major destruction that's happening to those research institutions. And one of the things that was cut was children's cancer research. And I've read almost nothing. Maybe some of that money was, came back. I don't know. But I was just stunned. I was just like gobsmacked. And it was like, okay, media, do your job. I was looking for a lot. What's the university going to say? And there was a little bit of reporting, but not very much. And it was like the university didn't say anything. They were fearful. But this is something that I just think it makes everybody, it makes Trump, it makes Musk, it makes all the Republicans. It just makes them look so bad. How can you cut something so important with virtually very little consequences or even public knowledge? And I just
Yeah.
feel for the researchers with their long trials that are just stopped. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that and how that can be used to help,
Yeah, well, yeah, it's a couple of thoughts, Bob. I mean, first and foremost, let's start with the obvious, which is that Doge was a complete failure. It didn't save the federal government any money. It destroyed an enormous number of programs, both in health research that we just touched on, as well as many others, including USDA programs that were doing really good things for our own state, and so much more, right? Just tremendous destruction, in its wake. And, I think that goes part and parcel with the Republican budget that then came over the summer, the Medicaid cuts, and we'll get to more of that in a second. I know that obviously there was the freeze that was in place. The freeze has been undone. They currently go through changes about the percentage of grants from things like NIH and whatever that are going to limit the amount of money that can be spent on administering the grants. And so there's some of that minutia that is still being worked out. But when we're out on the campaign trail, and we are always very intentional about not just inviting Democrats to come to our events, we invite Republicans and independents. When some of those folks are coming out to our events who voted for Donald Trump in 2024, this isn't what they voted for. I mean, same thing from farmers, right? With what's happening with the tariffs, what's happening with ACA premiums going up, what's happening with, these mass deportations. I mean, you go down the list and you have an agenda coming out of Washington that is uniquely tailored in some respects to be bad for a state like Iowa. The hits to the University of Iowa, to the University Hospital, I think are going to continue to kind of come into clearer focus in 2026 and 2027. The Medicaid cuts, I mean, we went to Red Oak and we met with leaders from Montgomery County Memorial Hospital. The words that they used to describe Medicaid's effect on their hospital was our salvation. It's a verbatim quote, right? And when these cuts kick in, this $50 million fund, by the way, compared to 800 billion in cuts, I mean, it is less than a drop in the bucket, right? It's absolutely not going to make up for the cuts that are coming. And there is tremendous fear among a lot of the rural hospitals that we engage with about what this is going to mean for their ability to continue to operate in the future. And so I think, DOGE was obviously ideologically driven, and it was not actually didn't accomplish what the stated goals were. I think obviously there were goals that they weren't explicitly stating in public that were really what they were trying to do. But the last point that I'll make on that, Bob, is that it makes me furious that Democrats in Washington, D.C. allowed Elon Musk and DOGE to take up the mantle of government efficiency. I mean, I'm a Democrat and I've been a Democrat my whole life because we are the party that since the New Deal has fought for workers' rights and civil rights and women's rights. I'm also a Democrat because I know that at its best, government has the ability to make people's lives better through programs that can genuinely transform communities that have, served our country, our citizens very, very well. And the fact that as a party, we have not done a good enough job actually taking efficiency of government seriously, making government work for people is a huge problem. I think one of the challenges that we have is that there are too many people who think that being a senator or a representative is about kind of representing the government to the people instead of representing the people to the government. That is the approach that I've always taken during my time in the state legislature. And I think anybody who was taking that approach would never have allowed what happened to the University of Iowa, the hospital, and everything else that is happening across our state to happen.
Okay, Lyle Muller, you're next. And then if any of you who are not members of the Iowa Writers Collaborative have questions, please just raise your hand. I'll probably go to Susan Beckman next, but Lyle, you're up first.
Thank you. Well, first of all, although you see books behind me, I'm covering up the vinyl that's also behind me. I do have I have two questions if there's time, and I know that time is running short, and I want to give other people a chance. So I do want to talk about Ashley Hinson, and I'm wondering when a good friend of mine, Liz Mathis, ran against her for a congressional district. I was really disappointed that Liz didn't call her out more for using her ability to be a news reader, which meant she was handed a script and was able to deliver it in a convincing way that was much more convincing than, say, when Liz was trying to explain issues. I'm wondering how you're going to address that and then do dish on what you want to say about her.
Well, look, you teed it up, so I'll just go right in. I'm sure many of the folks who are on this Zoom remember back in 2019, my very first year in the state Senate, we had these out-of-state investment companies come into Iowa, start buying mobile home communities, trailer parks all over our state, jacking up the rent. This is the lot rent for the trailers, 50, 60, 70% from one month to the next. There were 3 of these communities that were bought by the same company from Utah in my district. 2 in Johnson County, 1 in Cedar County, facing these massive rent increases. And I was outraged by what I was reading in the media. So I went to knock doors in my own communities to hear directly from my constituents about how this was affecting them. And the stories, Lyle, that I heard were just heartbreaking. I met, widows whose husbands, had helped them, get into that community. I heard from single parents who were incredibly scared of being evicted from the community. People, with disabilities who were not going to be able to move if they couldn't afford the lot rent. And it was incredibly hard. And so I went to my Republican colleagues in the Senate and I said, look, I know that I just got here. I know that we don't agree on every issue, but this is not about left versus right. This is about right versus wrong. And we have to do something here. And so we did it the right way. We built a bipartisan coalition, and we actually got a bill through the Iowa State Senate 48-0, which does not happen every day on these very high profile, pieces of legislation. We sent it over to the House, and I was told, this is a done deal. Who could possibly vote against this? And then I get called over for a closed door meeting. I go into the room. There's a conference table sitting on one side as a Republican representative who I knew was sympathetic to what we were trying to do. Sitting on the other side of the table was the lobbyist representing those big investment companies. And sitting next to him was then State Representative Ashley Hinson. And I was in the room when Ashley Hinson, as a favor to that lobbyist, killed our bipartisan legislation to protect, by the way, not just my constituents, Ashley Hinson's constituents too. And she cared more about that lobbyist and the $1,500 that they have been able to facilitate to her 2018 reelection campaign than she did about the people who she is actually supposed to be representing as a member of the Iowa House of Representatives. And so when we talk about the connection between an economy that's working great for the big investment firms and the billionaires and everybody else, but we are struggling, we are seeing this cost of living crisis. I got a firsthand experience of that in 2019, watching that happen. And the connection between those two things is people like Ashley Hinson, who, again, care more about their own political power, they're standing with their own party, than they do about doing the right thing for the people who they're supposed to represent. And so those are the two things, to me, that are at the heart of this campaign. The third thing, and Julie, you haven't really had a chance to get to it, we desperately need a new vision for the future of this state. Scripture tells us that there's no vision that people perish. And you look at the trajectory that we are on right now, we are on a trajectory of perishing. And so we desperately need that new vision, and we can hopefully get into that here just a little bit at the end. But Lyle, I cannot tell you, we desperately needed a new senator. Joni Ernst was not doing the job. Ashley Hinson, having the opportunity here to send her packing and make sure that she never steps foot in the U.S. Senate. I've seen it firsthand. She sold us out. We're going to do everything that we can to make sure that she never steps foot in the U.S. Senate.
Lyle,
And then
okay,
yeah.
Go ahead. Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah. How much money is this campaign going to cost? It seems the costs just get larger and larger every year.
Yeah, it's a good question. Look, general election in 2020 for Teresa Greenfield, I think it was probably $65 million all in. I'd expect it to be probably even higher than that this time around. It's been, 6 years. Inflation is real. So I think you're probably talking, probably $100 million all in for the general election, if I had to guess. And that's just on the Democratic side, by the way, not even the Republican side. And by the way, I also just mentioned too, Republicans are nervous. There's a reason why they had the super PAC that just announced a big 6-figure TV buy trying to bolster Ashley Hinson. That is not something you do on the Republican side if you think this is a safe seat in 2026. They're running scared. They're looking at all the polling numbers, both here in the state and across the country. There's a reason why we were leading Joni Ernst head-to-head in August, shortly before she dropped out of the race. We have what it takes to win, and I know that we're going to defeat Ashley.
Okay, good. Lyle, you good? Okay, Tim Wagner and then Alex.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. Hey, Zach, good to see you. You were up here in Decorah a few weeks ago. We met and talked. Really loved your talk and presentation. My question is pertaining to one of the biggest issues facing millions of Americans right now, and that's healthcare affordability. What do you think? I mean, the ACA was a Band-Aid when it was passed. Obviously a big compromise. Where's this going to go? What are you thinking?
Yeah, great question, Tim. So a couple of thoughts on healthcare. So my sister is on an ACA plan and is one of those people whose premiums are going up because Republicans did not extend the investments in the ACA. I think there's so much that has to happen when it comes to our healthcare system. You look at things like lowering the Medicare enrollment age to 55, expanding Medicare coverage to include dental, vision, hearing. I think that when you look at Ashley Hinson has voted not once but twice against capping the cost of insulin, and there are 250,000 Iowans for whom insulin is a life-saving medication and just increasingly unaffordable. And again, that ties back to what we were saying earlier about corporate consolidation being a key factor in what's driving up costs for everybody, both across our state and across the country. Tariffs, by the way, another example when it comes to pharmaceuticals. We need to make sure that Medicare has the ability to make sure that we can cap those costs out of pocket for Iowans for whom that's life-saving medication. Another topic that comes up in healthcare, we've done a little bit of work on this in the state legislature, but there's more to do, is PBM reform. PBMs are basically the middleman that have been driving up the cost of prescription drugs for so many people, and also shuttering. If you look at a map of Iowa that has lost a small town or independent family pharmacy over the last 5 years, the entire state lights up. And this is a pure matter of corporate greed. It's a huge problem for our state. There are some additional things that we're working on now that I'm not ready to get into the details on today, but stay tuned early next year. We're going to have a lot more to talk about in this topic.
Okay. Thank you. Good question, Tim. Alex, what's the status of the election for the nurses joining the Teamsters?
Yeah, we're just waiting for our win announcement. And I just want to say thanks to Zach for supporting us. You've been out to at least one of our rallies. You were endorsed by Teamsters Local 90, which we will officially be Teamsters Local 90 nurses here in the coming weeks once the NLRB makes a final determination. So yeah, I just want to thank you for your support and let everybody know we are going to win this thing.
Really?
Yep, absolutely. It would be, so there's 250. I won't go too far into this, but there's 251 challenge ballots. We only need, if those even count, we only need 24 of them to be yeses to win. So anyway, hopefully in the next few weeks we'll have that win announcement. But right now we're just waiting. So questions for Zach. One, I think you've already said that you would support the PRO Act in the U.S. Senate, which I think is so important. I've learned a lot about labor history over the last year, just trying to organize a union in my workplace. And the Taft-Hartley Act, my understanding is that is one of the worst pieces of legislation for labor in the United States. And I just wanted to see maybe what your take on Taft-Hartley is, and if repealing that or turning that back is possible.
Yeah, Alex, first of all, let me just say thank you. I've had the chance to join the United Nurses campaign, I think on 3 different occasions. And again, I don't know, Alex, I think you might have hopped on briefly after I had the chance to talk about my own family's connection and my mom, Jackie, being a union nurse and the difference that made for my family. So I was really proud to be there with you. I appreciated your having my back, and to have the support of so many labor unions all over the state. I'll tell you, labor is going to be a key piece of our coalition for winning both the primary election and the general election. And when we talk about how we're going to win a statewide race here in Iowa, that is going to be a key piece of our coalition, especially in the eastern part of the state where you do still have decent labor union density, but where we have lost some support with rank and file. The reason that we're getting support from a lot of these locals, and it's a wide variety, you're looking both at building construction trades, Teamsters, public sector, private sector, firefighters. They know that when I'm in the room with their members and I can talk with them, I can answer their questions, that I'm a labor Democrat that they want to support. And that's been a key piece of getting to this point already. And so in terms of policy, like I said, day one co-sponsor of the PRO Act, that is going to be one of the most important pieces of legislation in decades to rebuild a fair economy, support workers' rights in the workplace, and expand our ability to organize all over the United States. In terms of Taft-Hartley, that's definitely something, Alex, I'd be happy to visit with you offline. There's some very in the weed stuff there, but at the end of the day, I think the most important message that I have is that we are a pro-worker campaign. I'm the labor Democrat in this race, and we are going to win the primary and the general election thanks to hardworking people like you all over Iowa.
So, Zach, I've had an opportunity to interview the other candidates in the primary, and I think they'd probably take issue with not wearing the mantle of labor Democrat too. Josh Turek has racked up a number of endorsements from other labor unions. In the horse race scheme of things, you came out of the gate, you raised a lot of money. At this point, I think Josh has a little more cash on hand, at least according, and Laura, you can check me. I'm sure Laura knows off the top of her head. Okay, she's given a thumbs up to that. So tell me where you see this race going in terms of, it looks like Josh has a little more momentum at this point if money raising is a key factor, which it usually is.
Yeah, so I have to confess, I'm not 100% up on all the various labor endorsements that have been made in the race. I'll tell you, I know that we are definitely leading. I did see that Josh picked up an endorsement from a local over in Omaha from the Insulators, and we got the same international on the other side of the state over in the Quad Cities. And Julie, I would just say, the reason that we've been able to build that support is because I've got a track record that goes back years and been able to build a lot of those relationships traveling all over Iowa. When I was the minority leader, this was to the earlier question that came up. One of the things that I was shocked by was the fact that our relationships with our labor partners had really atrophied over the years. And I put a real point of emphasis on rebuilding those relationships during that time, and have obviously continued to build those relationships all over the state. And that's something that I think is going to be, like I said, a really key piece for us in this race. And that's why I'm proud to have more endorsements from locals and individual labor leaders than any other candidate. It's not just me saying I'm the Labor Democrat in the race, by the way. It's firefighters, it's iron workers, it's nurses, it's communication workers, right? That are the ones, frankly, whose support we're really proud to have. Look, in terms of the race, there's no doubt that I think being the preferred candidate for folks in Washington has some advantages, including there's no doubt that there was a strong early report for Representative Turek. But when it comes to being able to win the election, I will tell you, the message that we have is resonating with people as we travel all over the state. The grassroots support that we're getting is tremendous. I think that the numbers that we'll have here, I think in just over a month, will definitely give us a good picture in terms of where the race is at. But when it comes to building out the grassroots organization, that is what it's going to take for us to win. That is a place where I know we're definitely leading the field, and I think we're leading in a pretty significant way. I'll give us one example, Julie. We had obviously Thanksgiving a few weeks ago. Back in the spring, when my wife and I were talking about whether or not we wanted to get into the campaign, at that point, one of the things that we really emphasized was that we didn't want to just get to the end of this campaign and have the only thing that we could point to show for this whole effort was tens of millions of dollars spent on TV ads during football games that nobody really liked watching anyway, because they'd rather be more focused on the game. And so we said from the beginning, we want to take our values and build those into the campaign. And so I mentioned the values earlier. I think Andy might have dropped a link to the Build the Barn values that are on our website. But going back to my time as an Eagle Scout, we said we wanted to really bring the spirit of service to the campaign. And so we spent the Thanksgiving holiday working with our volunteers at a dozen different projects all over the state, more than 100 people showing out, a year before a general election to make our communities better and start building, like I said, that organization all over Iowa. That is exactly what we're doing. We have hundreds of volunteers all over the state, and that's how we're going to win this race, not just the primary. That's how we're going to win the general election too. It's going to be through people who are taking the future into their own hands, who believe that we are the people who we've been waiting for. And that message, by the way, that spirit is resonating with people. I think that's part of why we're getting those endorsements from labor. It's also why we've been getting endorsements from people across the political spectrum, Democrats, independents, and Republicans. And that's how we're going to build a coalition that can not just win this election, defeat Ashley Hinson, but actually begin doing the really hard work of getting our state back on track, because Lord knows we got a lot of work to do.
Well, thank you so much, Zach. I look forward to having you back. And I hope you had a good time and a good exchange of ideas and questions from the group. And let's have you back in the 2026 season.
That sounds good. Thanks,
All right.
Julie.
Thank you so much, everyone. See you next week.